So these are some things we need to fill in today. We're kind of between chapters 2 and 3, and in the larger scope of things here, what we're doing is we're transitioning from what I refer to as traditional or classical trade theory, which was, the mercantilists' ideas, which were wrong. The absolute advantage model of Adam Smith and the comparative advantage model of David Ricardo. Those three models constitute classical or traditional trade theory. I think that's my term, not the book's term. But what we're going to do next is we're going to work our way through to modern trade theory, which kind of kicks in the 1950s. And what that does is it kind of follows some larger trends that were occurring in the science of economics over the time. Basically, the science was becoming a little more mathematically sophisticated, a little more involved. We had gone, between the time of David Ricardo and the time of modern trade theory, we'd gone through the Industrial Revolution. So even the way we made things, the way the economy functioned had changed, and the science of economics kind of changed accordingly. It had to become more sophisticated. So our trade models had to become a little more sophisticated as a result. So we'll be getting into that. The problem is there was a lot of economics that happened between 1800 and 1950. So we have to get a few economic tools under our belt, make sure that we're up to speed on how to think about things. And one of the issues, if you recall earlier, I said there was 3 problems with Adam Smith's model, one of which we cleaned up with comparative advantage. And that was the fact that not all countries have an absolute advantage. And so what is a more generalized model that encompasses all countries, not just the larger, more productive countries? And that was the comparative advantage solution that we came up with in the second model. So we solved that problem, but there were still 2 main problems. One, in the last lecture I went through, and we kind of cleaned that one up a bit, and it had to do with this notion of complete specialization. So the 2 things we're really fixing up now are complete specialization, and the other one, if you recall, had to do with what are the gains from trade, really? I've kind of loosely referred to them as the consumption gains and the production gains from trade. We make more stuff and we consume more stuff. And that's all I've really told you, but I haven't necessarily convinced you that more stuff equates with a higher level of social welfare. And that's the second thing we need to clean up, and that takes a little bit of playing around with some models that have to do with consumer choice theory and have to do with social welfare analysis. How do we know if society is really made better off? Now, of course, we're speaking in terms of economic well-being, but that's our standard of living, and that's kind of the general economic measure of social welfare that we want to kind of key in on. So the question is, how do we do that? And it's kind of a dicey proposition. It's the political season right now, and we have political candidates telling us exactly how they're going to make our lives better off. Have you noticed that? All of them seem to have a very finely tuned psychic ability to know what it is exactly that you want and need to make your life better. Have you noticed that? They tell you that you want health care, you want national security, you want these things, and they're making assumptions about your preferences. And if you really get down to it, what someone else thinks about your preferences and what you think about your preferences are 2 completely different things. Think about observing other people and how they spend their money, how they spend their time, how they do things. Sometimes we're just confused and baffled that this is what people want. But they're looking at you, and guess what they're thinking? The same thing. So we all have our own unique preferences, our own unique wants and needs, and it's that process of acquiring those things that we want and need based on our own personal preferences that ultimately raise our own personal standard of living. So I can sit here and scream at you till I'm blue in the face about what I think you should be doing. For instance, I think you should probably play a lot fewer video games. I think you should probably watch a lot less TV. I think you should probably spend less time online surfing around silly websites. But guess what I do myself? Yeah, I do a lot of those things myself, and so it's somewhat hypocritical to assume just because I know it's good for you to watch less TV that you should therefore do that. So economists like to let individuals make these decisions on their own and raise their own personal standard of living, as opposed to someone else having the presumption that they know what you need more than you do. It's actually endemic in our political system. And we've all just become kind of numb to it. We just expect that, yes, in fact, the politicians know what's best for us. They know how to educate our kids. They know how to protect us from terrorism. They know how, and guess what? They really don't. A good example has to do with after 9/11, we spent a lot of resources. A lot of our public resources went to terrorist prevention, because I remember on the news media, the media and the politicians who were talking about all this stuff, they kept telling us how afraid we were. And I was like, I'm not really, in Macon, Georgia, guess what? I'm not super fearful of ISIS coming to kill me in Macon, Georgia, although with the events of this past weekend, who knows? Those things make me mad. They make me a little angry. They make me want to, lash out. They don't really make me paranoid. They don't make me afraid. Does anybody lose sleep over terrorism? Maybe you lie in your beds, there's a terrorist today. If you listen to politicians, you think that's how we're all behaving. And then they can justify whatever kind of programs that they feel necessary to help solve those problems they think we have. Well, economists try to think about social welfare not in terms of what we think is best for you, but we try to tease out what you think is best for you, and the only way we can do that is observe your behavior. You see me drinking Diet Coke, so you know something about my preferences. You're drinking, it looks like a green tea there, it looks nice. I'm kind of jealous of your green tea because someone had the gall to buy me a Diet Coke. This stuff is like crack cocaine. I love it just as much.
Used to be.
Yeah, they used to put that in.
It's in a different form now.
They're still hitting that sweet spot there. I'm a big fan of Diet Coke. So what we do as economists is we've developed models, mathematical models, for illustrating how an individual maximizes their own personal welfare, their own individual welfare. And we refer to these models as utility maximization models. So the basic proposition is this. I see you walk into Walmart with a shopping cart, and you start filling it up with things. And what things are you filling it up with? Well, I'm operating on the assumption you are filling it up with the things that you personally want and need for your household. If you think about it, how many possible combinations of goods can you put into a basket at Walmart? Yeah, there's millions, unlimited seemingly. It is finite, but it seems like it's unlimited. How many different combinations of goods and services you can purchase? You can purchase services, you can do your taxes there, right? There's all kinds of combinations you can purchase there based on your own personal wants and needs. So when I see you walking through there, you don't buy all those possible combinations. You just buy one. And guess which one I'm assuming you're buying? The one you like the most or the one you like the least? Yeah, obviously, that's the one that gives you the highest level of personal welfare. That's the one that makes you as well off as possible. Have you ever gone through Walmart and just kind of look at what people are buying? Do it. It's kind of fun. Just snoop around a little bit and say, wow. What you'll notice is that other people have different preferences than you. Other people don't buy the same fruits and vegetables that you buy. Other people don't buy the same meats that you buy. Other people don't buy the same video games that you buy. People have their own sets of preferences. So to accommodate this, we've built very sophisticated models that capture a couple of elements that are important in doing this exercise, in buying and maximizing your own buying things, and consequently maximizing your own utility. The three main component parts are the prices that you face in the store, because that has a limiting factor on what you can buy, doesn't it? Some things are out of your price range, some things are within your budget constraint. The other part of that is your income, how much money you have. And more precisely, how much money you've allocated for the consumption of these particular goods that you're buying in this given day. So prices and income set up this thing called a budget constraint. So if you can imagine that in Walmart, all they had were shirts and pants, just two things you could buy, not all the other stuff in there. Just clear it all out, just replace everything with just shirts and pants, and all the shirts look the same, all the pants look the same. And assume that the price of everything in Walmart is $10. All the shirts cost $10, all the pants cost $10. Anybody confused at this point? Or is this as simple as I think it sounds? Now let me give you some income. Let me say you have $100 that you've allocated to buying stuff during this time period, today, this week, whatever. And I give each of you that $100, and I send you all over to Walmart. Since we've simplified, it's going to get a little easy here to kind of think that there's only so many combinations of things you can buy now, aren't there? First and foremost, I know one thing, and that is, since all of you have $100 allocated to buy shirts and pants all cost $10 each, I know you're all buying 10 items. But what do I not know necessarily? Yeah, the combination of shirts and pants you're going to purchase. So some of you are going to purchase 5 shirts and 5 pants. Some might purchase 10 pants and no shirts, or 10 shirts and no pants, right? And all the 9-1, 8-2s, 7-3s, and 6-4 combinations of shirts and pants as well. So if we were to do this exercise, send all of you out to Walmart and have you come back, we could then have show and tell. And then we could start saying something about each of your preferences. Some of you had more of a preference for shirts. Some had more of a preference for pants. Some seemed to be indifferent between shirts and pants and bought equal quantities. And all of this stuff kind of plays into how we make our decisions. And if you think about it, that's ultimately the very basic, most fundamental parts of this decision. Prices and income determined how much you could buy, the different combinations that were part of what we call your feasibility set. What were the feasible combinations of shirts and pants that you could purchase? But then that third thing, preferences, came into play, and that was, how do you think about your own preferences? Why did someone buy 5 and 5 and someone buy 6 and 4? Why is it, if you think about your wants and needs, and why might have you gone in and bought 10 pairs of pants? What if you were one of those people that went in and said, okay, I need 10 pairs of pants? What was probably the case with your closet at home?
Plenty of shirts.
You already had plenty of shirts, and you wanted and needed some pants. To give you more shirts would have done what to your own personal level of welfare? Not a whole lot. You were already saturated in shirts. But pants really raised your level of economic well-being. So your preferences have some kind of internal characteristics, meaning some people just have a slight preference for maybe pants over shirts. That might justify why they bought all pants. Maybe they're obsessed with pants. Maybe they do have a lot of pants. They love pants so much, what do they want? More pants. So that's a type of I would refer to that as an internal preference, something you're just kind of pre-programmed with, right? And then there's also this element of, well, I already have enough shirts, therefore I'm going to buy some pants. So there's also that kind of not just wanting things, but needing things. And so when we talk about your wants and needs, it kind of captures what your preferences are all about. The problem about people's preferences is they are somewhat fickle. Have you ever bought a shirt and never worn it? Yeah. Have you maximized your own personal welfare by wasting your money on a shirt you'll never wear? No. We make a lot of errors like that. We buy things because of emotion. We buy things spur of the moment. We have impulse buys. Dealers are very aware that retailers and like car dealerships are very aware of impulse buys. I went looking at cars last week up in Atlanta, and they let me test drive a couple of cars, and I was all excited about it. And I got back in there, and they were hoping that I was just so in love with these cars, I'd just pay them top dollar, right? And they were just hoping I was one of those impulse buyers. And I thought, I'm not. I'm in no rush. I don't have to buy this car. I just, wanted to check it out and see. And yeah, I like it, but no, I'm not going to pay you top dollar for it. No, well, we can't sell it to you. I'm like, really? Can't come off at any? No. We'll see. I'll wait. So sometimes we buy things irrationally and emotionally. And again, retailers kind of know this, and they'll put things out there right in front of you and hope that you'll grab them up even if you don't want them, because they just want your money, right? Actually, it's not altogether true. If you go to a place and they kind of trick you into buying a lot of things that you never use, what will your future history with that, or your future consumption with that particular establishment probably look like? You probably will stop going, won't you? What do most retailers want you to? How do they want you to be with your purchases? I think they want you to be happy and satisfied with them, right? So that you do what? Come back and buy more, and that's the way they kind of guarantee the long-term profits. So sometimes we and that's not true of used car sales. They don't care, because you don't buy used cars frequently enough to be a repeat customer, probably. So they're just going to try to stick it to everybody. All right. That being said, in order to say something about people's preferences, we can't let irrational, human, impulsive, emotional purchases, among other things like that, muddy the waters. We need a clean model that assumes that consumers are very rational. There's a TV series, Big Bang Theory, and there's this guy Sheldon, if you're familiar with the TV series. He's kind of the perfect consumer, if you think about it. Does he make any mistakes? No, he's super brilliant, and he knows exactly what he likes. There are certain things he likes, certain T-shirts, he likes certain foods, certain restaurants.
On certain days.
On certain days. He's got it dialed in, doesn't he? He has basically these perfect computed preferences. That's really easy to model that, because he's not making those stupid mistakes, because you can't model irrational behavior. It just looks just random. So he has very predictable and very describable, and he has preferences that we can model very easally. So kind of think about that. What are the characteristics that make Sheldon, make him an ideal consumer who doesn't make mistakes? Well, it turns out there's a list of things. And let me show you what these things are. And there it is. The models that we build for consumer choice theory to see how consumers maximize their utility, it's an axiomatic model, and axioms. These are the preference axioms. And the preference axioms are statements and assumptions about your behavior that make you act rationally. They require 7 basic ideas. 1, that your preferences are complete. 2, that they are reflexive. 3, that they are transitive. 4, that they are continuous. 5, they are non-satiated. 6, they are monotonic. And 7, your preferences have a shape to them, and that shape is convex. So, if you are a well-behaved consumer, an economically speaking, well-behaved, rational consumer, you have to follow these rules. You have to have complete, reflexive, transitive, continuous, non-satiated, monotonic, and convex preferences. If any of these is violated, you're liable to make mistakes. You're going to buy that shirt that you never wear. And what have you not done then? You have not done what I assume you're doing, so my models don't really capture that person. We always violate these things to one degree or another. We all violate transitivity every now and then. Probably monotonicity. We're pretty good with convexity. Maybe non-satiated. Continuous is kind of there for math reasons, so it's kind of easy to violate all the time. So it's kind of an assumption that we have to do math with this stuff. But without going into all of these, because they can get a little bit dense. I will give you, we're gonna focus on the first one and the last one. And you can just, you can figure out what the others are on your own. Complete preferences are pretty straightforward. Go back to that idea of Walmart and taking your shopping cart around and putting stuff in it, filling up a basket of goods. We call that in economics, guess what? A basket of goods. And a basket of goods, more precisely, has to do with a typical consumption bundle, what a consumer buys over some period of time. But think of it more literally as a shopping cart full of stuff. Fill up one shopping cart with some random stuff, fill up another shopping cart with some random stuff, and look at each cart, look at the contents of each cart. I'm going to put letter A on one of them and letter B on the other. So we got cart A and cart B. And if your preferences are complete, you have to tell me one of three things. If you're a rational consumer, you must tell me that you either think A is greater than B, you like A, you have a preference, a strong preference for A over B. You can tell me that you think B is greater than A. You like B better. You can also tell me a third thing, that you think A and B are the same. You either like them equally well or hate them equally well, but you are indifferent between the two in either case. Notice what this leaves out. You can't look at the baskets and tell me, I don't know. You can't do A question mark B. That's not a possibility, because that suggests you don't have preferences. And if I'm trying to model your preferences, guess what you kind of have to have? You got to have a preference. So do you see the importance of these? If we're going to model your preferences, you got to have complete preferences. You got to have preferences for me to model them. But think about it. Do you violate that one ever? Have you ever gone shopping with a friend and you got two shirts, I don't know, a blue shirt and a red shirt? And you hold up the blue shirt and the red shirt to your friend, and what do you ask them?
Which one do you like better?
Which one do you like better? And what's the implication there? What are you insinuating?
You gotta have an opinion.
Yeah, you don't have an opinion yet. But actually, this is an interesting case where these axioms are not so unrealistic. Because every time you've done that, think about that. You've held up the two shirts and said, which one do you like better? And you realize, which one should I buy, right? As if you have no preferences over these two. It's not that you're necessarily indifferent, notice, because if you're indifferent, you would just grab one randomly and go buy it. It wouldn't matter. One was just as good as the other. You're really confused as to what your preferences are, or are you? Because the second they say, oh, I like the red one, what do you say? I'm going with the blue, right? So you knew all along. What were you looking for? Yeah, you were looking for some confirmation. You were a little insecure about your purchase. It may have been a weak preference, not a strong preference. And all it took was the other person kind of coming down with some commitment issues on you. And the second that they threw those in your face and it became real, what did you do? You locked in on your preferences. So it happens to be the case that even when we don't think our preferences are complete, even when we seem confused sometimes, many times we're not. We just haven't quite drawn that link from our subconscious, wherever this stuff resides, to our conscious decision making. These other ones are important for various reasons, but I don't want to get into them, but they all kind of have that same flavor. They force you to behave a certain way that's rational and predictable. And that brings us to the last one. Your preferences are convex. And let me show you. Convex means bowed inward. And let me show you what that looks like. The way we illustrate your preferences are with these things called indifference curves. And let's stick with that example of shirts and pants. Your preferences tend to look something like that. That's a really nice, well-behaved set of preferences, and we call that an indifference curve. So remember, this is that third element. You got your prices and your income that determine what you can buy, but this shows what you want to buy. This is how you value shirts and pants relative to one another. That's ultimately what these indifference curves show. Now, if you think about your shopping behaviors, you're walking through Walmart or walking through a used car dealership or walking through any particular market, are you seeing these indifference curves in your head? No, this is not the way you intuitively think about decisions. That's much more of an organic process. Again, it's kind of like, do I like this or not? This is, however, precisely the mathematics behind how a rational decision maker makes their decisions. So it's not necessarily intuitive, but it is accurate as to how your preferences are modeled. And let me kind of go through it to kind of show you why that is, and more importantly, why this thing is bowed inward. Notice how it's bowed inward there towards the origin? It's not bulging out, it's pulled in, it's sucked in. It's convex. The important thing to understand about how we model your preferences is this term indifference curves. Remember, you can be three things with any two basket of goods. You can prefer one over the other one over the first, or you can be indifferent between the two. Well, an indifference curve highlights that third possibility. It says, actually, with all combinations of shirts and pants, we can tease out the contents and find all of the possible combinations that actually you are indifferent between. Hold on. Now, if I asked you to go down to the store and pick out 100,000 baskets that you're completely indifferent between, that might seem like an overwhelming exercise, and it actually is. You probably couldn't pull it off. So what's a better way of thinking about the indifference curves and all of these combinations, in this case, of shirts and pants that you're completely indifferent between? Think about this. You've got a basket with some shirts and pants in it, and I take away some of your pants out of that basket. To keep you just as satisfied, just happy, what do I have to do? I got to give you either back the pants I just took, or I can give you back some more shirts. The question is, how many shirts do I have to give you to compensate for that pair of pants that I just took away from you? And you can always figure that out, because there's obviously some really small number that's not enough, and there's probably a really large number that's too much. So what does that imply? Somewhere in between, there is a number that you're, and this is basic barter. This is what you've been doing since you were a kid on the playground, trading Pokemon cards or trading marbles or whatever the heck you guys traded when you were in school. What do you guys trade? You guys trade anything? You traded baseball cards. Anybody here trade marbles ever?
I ain't quite that old.
I don't think anybody. I'm not that old either. I'm the oldest one in here, so. So marbles, yeah. But you used to trade, like, you'd have like a big blue marble, and they had these little ones called cat eyes, and the game of marbles is pretty lame, but you might trade one big blue for 7 cat eyes. Or if you were trading Pokemon cards or Yu-Gi-Oh cards, anybody trade those in high school? Actually, no one wants to admit that they did, but I know some of you did. Because that was all the rage. There were some cards that were ultra rare, and if you wanted to trade someone, you'd have to trade a lot of common cards for that one ultra rare. Matter of fact, you might need some semi-rare ones in the mix as well to compensate. So this idea of trading off one thing for another that gives you kind of an even trade is what we're really doing here. What are these points of even trade? So let's think about why this thing is shaped convexly. I mentioned that's an important characteristic, and let me go through and explain why. Put ourselves way up here on this indifference curve. Notice that's a basket. We'll call it basket A. Excuse me. That's a basket that contains a lot of shirts but not a lot of pants. Imagine that was your closet, and you had 1,000,000 shirts and no pants. Let's just make this extreme. This is hyperbole, I know, but go with me here. It makes it easier to kind of wrap your brain around to exaggerate these things. Got 1,000,000 shirts and no pants. If I come knocking on your door and say, hey, I heard you have 1,000,000 shirts and no pants in your closet, and you're like, how do you know that? Don't worry about it. It's my example. I can make this up as I want to. Like, that's creepy. I said, don't worry about it. It's just an example. So I'm like, hey, I know you have a bunch of shirts and no pants, but I'm here to save the day because I have some pants. Would you like a pair of pants? And you're like, yeah, I really would like a pair of pants. Okay, the problem is I want some shirts. Now, the question is, how many of those 1,000,000 shirts are you willing to give up for that first pair of pants? And really chew on that for a second. Don't be stingy. Don't try to be some super Shark Tank negotiator here. Just think realistically. You've got 1,000,000 shirts, most of which you will never wear, How many of those should you be willing to give up for that one pair of pants, considering you're about to go a whole day with no pants? Yeah, you should be willing to trade a lot of shirts for a few pants. So if you're at point A and I take away a lot of your shirts to keep you just as happy, oops, kind of messed that up. Notice I only have to give you a few pants. Moving from A to A prime there. Take away a lot of shirts, you only need a few pants. So at that point, because you're saturated in shirts, you're willing to trade a lot of them for just a few pairs of pants. I've actually mentioned this concept to you already in a previous lecture, and I talked about it, people preferring a balance in their consumption, and we'll see how that ties in a second. But notice way over here, way down here at point B, you've got a lot of pants and no shirts. There, if I take away a lot of your pants, I only have to give you a few shirts to keep you just as happy. So moving from B back to B prime, you're willing to trade a lot of pants for a few shirts. And this gets down to that idea of not what you necessarily want, but what you need. And when you have a lot of something already, you're willing to trade a lot of it for something you don't have a lot of. Think about what that means. If you have a lot of pants and you're willing to trade a lot of them for a few shirts, and you have a lot of shirts, you're willing to trade a lot of them for a few pairs of pants, notice where you're moving towards there. You're moving towards a balance in consumption. You tend to not like those situations where you have a whole bunch of one thing and not a lot of something else. So you're willing to give up a lot of what you have for a little bit of what you don't have. That's also the same idea as if you eat Chinese food every day for a month, you get sick of it. When you have a lot of it, you're willing to give it up for just a little bit of something else. So it's that same principle, but it's embedded actually in the shape, in the mathematical shape of your preferences. And so notice, since it's very steep up here and very flat down here, that causes this thing to be bowed inward. And that's what convexity is. It's that idea that you tend to prefer a balance in your consumption. And we actually call it something snazzy. We call it the diminishing marginal rate of substitution. Think about a hiker walking down this hill. What do you notice? What's happening to the steepness of the hill? It's diminishing. That's the diminishing marginal rate of substitution. The rate at which you're willing to substitute one thing for another tends to diminish with the relative quantities of each. I don't know if it's right, but I'll go ahead and try it.
No, just the
diminishing marginal rate of substitution. It sounded really snazzy when I said the definition, but if you chew on it, you'll see, you'll get a feel for what that means. Again, how many shirts are you willing to give up for more pants? Well, it's diminishing. You're willing to give up a lot over here, but you're not willing to give up a lot down here. That's the diminishing marginal rate of substitution. And that's just, again, that kind of hints at this way we value scarcity, right? Why do people like diamonds so much? Because they're scarce, right? You don't have a lot, so you value them highly. So again, these are all just kind of basic, pre-programmed parts of our preferences. We're all kind of born into this world with these same kind of preference tendencies. Now, they spin off in all kinds of weird directions, don't they? Some people like diamonds, some people don't like diamonds. Some people like Diet Coke, some people like Sprite, right? There's all kind of variations of our preferences, but after you've kind of locked in on what your preferences are intuitively, then all these rules kind of apply to everybody. And that's why we can model it with these things. So, in a nutshell, any person's preferences over two goods, a Y good and an X good, always tend to look like something like that. And let's take a point here, point A. I want you to think about the shape of your preferences, how bowed inward that is, how convex it is, whether it's skewed one way or another. Those are all those characteristics of your preferences that kind of define your own personal flair, right? How you like things. That's embedded in the shape of those preferences. That tends to be fairly conservative, meaning if you like broccoli today, you will probably like it tomorrow. Your preferences over time and over space tend to be fairly consistent. And again, that's that internal thing. The fact that I've liked Diet Coke for many years now, it's a very conservative preference. I said you can like Diet Coke, you can like Sprite. Never quite developed that taste for Sprite. Okay? Do they change over time slowly? Yeah. As a kid, you didn't like broccoli. Now you do. I didn't like tomatoes as a kid. Kind of like tomatoes a lot now. Not as much as some people, but I like tomatoes way better than I did when I was a kid. Love them on a BLT. You use a BLT right now. So think of the shape as kind of that pre-programmed way you like things. It doesn't change a whole lot. So what we can do is we can take your preferences and take that same shape and shift it outward in this direction. Call that indifference curve 1. Call this indifference curve 2. And now we can look at point B here. Now notice that A and B are not on the same indifference curve. They're on two separate indifferences, but these are still your preferences. This is still the shape of your preferences. What we say is that indifference curve 2 here gives you a higher level of utility than indifference curve 1. It's both higher physically on the graph, but it's also a higher level of utility. We'll call that U bar. That's a U. You would rather, if I asked you whether you like A or B better, you have to tell me you like B better. And the reason is, it's one of those axioms, by the way, that I probably should have pointed out to you. Non-satiated means that more is better. In a sense that you're never satisfied. That's what non-satiation means. You always want more. And again, that's an easy thing to prove, because the only question you have to ask as to whether you're satiated is this: do you right now have everything you've ever wanted? And the answer that everybody gives is no. And again, I know that because you're sitting in a class right now getting something probably that you don't have yet, which is a business degree. So again, get used to that. That's the way you've been your whole life. That's the way you'll be the rest of your life. After I got my undergraduate degree, I wasn't satisfied. Went back and got a master's. Wasn't satisfied. Went back and got a PhD. I was pretty much saturated in education at that point. Actually, what happened? I just ran out of degrees to get. There were no more degrees to go out and get. So did that mean I stopped learning? Did my thirst for knowledge go away after that? No, of course not. And you're always. So do I know everything right now? No. I don't know anywhere near all the things I want to know. So I Google them all the time. It is pretty fascinating that this knows everything I want to know. I just have to get through it all. I don't think I have the time to get through it all, though. So non-satiation, the fact that you're never satisfied, means more is better. And that just means that you prefer higher indifference curves to lower ones. Now, again, we can look at any other point on this indifference curve, C or D, and you're indifferent between B, C, and D. They're all the same to you. But you like C, B, and D all better than you like A. That's how individuals think about their preferences. Oh, and by the way, just so you know, a budget constraint looks something like that. If this is the budget constraint for shirts and pants, the example that I've been doing, let's just stick with that. That's 10, that's 10. This is that line of 0 pants, 10 shirts. That's 10 pants, 0 shirts. And then all of your 9 1s, 8 2s, 6 4s, 5 5s are all on that line. Can you afford with $100 1 shirt and 1 pant? Yeah, it's inside your budget constraint. Can you afford 10 shirts and 10 pants out there? That's $200. That's outside of your budget constraint. So a budget constraint are all the combinations that you can afford, and the line itself, that line itself, are all the combinations that exhaust your income. And again, don't think of income as spending all the money you make. It's spending the money you've allocated for this particular purchase. That's the income. So that's the line you want to be on. That's the line that, if you're anywhere inside, you can always do better. But notice, once you get to the edge, you can't do any better. You have to give up one to get more of the other. And so what do? Well, we just bring together, let's see if you guys get this. There's your preferences. So what do you know? You can be at point A here because it's inside your budget constraint. You can be at point B there because it's on your budget constraint. You can't be at point C, but we can say something about A, B, and C since they're all on your same indifference curve. you're just as happy with A, B, and C. It just so happens that at point A, you're not spending all of your money. At point B, you are spending all of your money, and you don't have enough money to buy C, even though you can take it or leave it. It's the same as the others. Notice what you can do, though, from point A. You can buy more of each. And what do we know about buying more? It's better. So what can you do? You can push your indifference curve out. So let's do that. Let's go out all the way to here. Let's call that 1. We'll call this one 3 for the time being. What's the problem with indifference curve 3? It's a higher level of utility. You'd much rather be there, but what's the problem? It's completely outside your budget constraint. There's none of those combinations that you can afford. So do you see where we're going with this? What's happening right about there at indifference curve 2? Right at that point, we'll call it D, right there. Notice what's happening. That's where you buy 5 shirts and 5 pants. So if I see you coming back from Walmart with 5 pants and 5 shirts, I can assume your preferences look something like that, because that's the point where you've maximized your utility subject to your budget constraint. You can't do any better than that. Why did other people buy 7-3 combinations or 8-2 combinations or 6-4? Well, because their preferences were skewed one way or another. They had preferences that looked like that, or they had preferences that looked like that. In each case, everybody's maximizing their utility. They're just landing on a different point in the process of doing so. So that gives rise to the next thing. You kind of see how that kind of muddied that up a little bit, but let me clean it up here. In a generic sense, let's just go with a y and an x and a 0. And let's think about different preferences. There's one that's really skewed in, there's one that's only slightly skewed, here's one there. These are all pretty much valid. Those are all valid indifference curves. Notice I kind of muddied it up on purpose, but all of these have all of those characteristics. They're all complete, reflexive, transitive, continuous, non-satiated, monotonic, and convex. It's just some of them are skewed one way, some are more convex than the other, etc. Why can there be so many different indifference curves? Well, because everybody can have their own unique preferences. And it's just, again, the shape that determines your individual preferences. The question is, if we're going to be focusing, which is where we started this lecture, on social welfare, making as many people as well off as possible, we have to start with each individual's preferences. We can't leave anybody out here. We've got to give everybody kind of an equal vote in the matter. The problem is nobody thinks the same, do they? We all have slightly different preferences. Again, go to Walmart and watch people shop and see what they're buying. It's all different than what you buy. So the question is, how do we do this? Well, in an overly simplified mathematical sense, this is what we're doing. What have I just done there with that blue curve? I've created it can't go up. That's supposed to be flat. Anyway, created an indifference curve. I've taken everybody's and I've just kind of mushed them into my best guess as to what our social preferences look like. Now, is that like any one person's preferences exactly? No. It's just our best representation of our grouped preferences. And that's kind of the way it works, isn't it? Do they just make things that you like out there? No. But they're making things that a majority of us like enough to justify allocating resources to it. So don't worry about the math there. You can just kind of think of shooting the line of central tendency, if you will. That's one way to do it. You could have done it other ways. You could have said, well, we want to make sure that certain people are looked after, so we could have chosen one that was maybe more down here. We could have chosen one that was more up here. But the one that kind of is obvious in capturing as many people as possible is to think about is that one that kind of goes right through the middle. And that means this. Remember how I started this, that the media and politicians want to tell you how you think all the time? I'm not telling you how you think. What am I showing you here with a community indifference curve? That's not how I think you think. What is that? That's how y'all think. That's the best representation of how y'all think, based on your own preferences, lumped together the only way I can do it kind of fairly, right? Now, that may not align with my own personal preferences, and that's just the way it's going to be. For instance, there's this consumer good out there that was produced, and had you come to me and given me this idea and said, hey, Dr. George, would like to invest $100,000 in my business, and I'd say, oh, what are you doing? I'd like to hear about this business. It sounds fascinating to me. And you said, I'm going to make blankets with sleeves and sell them on late night TV and call them Snuggies. I'm like, oh, what are you going to make your blankets out of? Oh, just, fleece. You're going to sell fleece blankets with sleeves? Yeah, I'm going to sell them for $19.99 on late night TV. I'm projecting I'm going to make a fortune on this. What would I say to you? Yeah, you're crazy. I don't think anybody's going to buy those things. Yet, guess what? They sold. Do you see there's a risk in trying to guess what other people's preferences are? If you leave that up to a team of politicians and they're trying to figure out whether they should allocate public resources to making blankets with sleeves, I'm pretty sure they would say, hell no, we're not doing this. Because I would too. Yet, that's what you get. There's a great example of in the former Soviet Union. That's the way they did things. In the former Soviet Union, they had technocrats that were in charge of the economy. And they were the ones that decided what was made and what wasn't made. And so they made a list, and they said, well, we want some health care, we want a lot of education, and they did the list probably the same way you and I would do the list. We would think of all the important things. Where would we put electricity on that list? Yeah, that'd be a pretty high one, wouldn't it? Yeah, we need some electricity. Where would we put food on that list? Yeah, we'd put food up high on that list. And then they thought more and more, and things like toasters. Where do you put toasters on that list? Yeah, I put that one pretty low, right? That's not very important. And that's actually pretty close to the truth, because up until 1990, until the Iron Curtain fell, the former Soviet Union and all of their technocrats did produce a lot of things. They had a fairly large economy. They were making a lot of stuff. But guess what they never made one of? Toasters. Quick show of hands. How many of you have a toaster and or toaster oven at your house? Yeah, just about everybody. So something that they thought was not important, what did we just kind of establish? Everybody has one, which means what do we think about toasters? We think they're pretty important. You know another thing they screwed up constantly on that list? I don't know how they missed this one. Toilet paper.
Oh my God.
They consistently underproduced toilet papers. Now, every time you've ever gone to Kroger or Walmart or a McDonald's and used the restroom, probably shouldn't do that without some kind of sanitizer. What have you always noticed is always there? Toilet paper. Yeah, so the free market system responds to consumer demand based on our group's preferences very well. Even when we may not argue that something is important, our own behavior betrays us. We do buy Snuggies. We do buy toasters. We do buy toilet paper. And to try to guess that can be extremely risky and extremely dangerous. Another example I like to give along those lines is this. If I were to put you in the position of being the technocrat and go to Walmart and buy all the shirts and pants for us, knowing what you know now about consumer preferences, you have a pretty good background in it, people preferring a balance in their consumption, all that kind of stuff. And if I gave you a couple $1,000s and said, go buy shirts and pants for the class, what's your best bet? What should you go buy? Would be, yeah, half and half. So you go there and you buy half and half. Well, you just screwed it up. I want you to quickly think about your own closet. Do you have an equal number of shirts and pants in your own closet? What do you have? So why the hell did you just buy an equal number for everybody else? Do you see how easy it is to make these mistakes? What seems perfectly rational and logical and fair isn't always exactly the way we behave. And at the end of the day, I'm more concerned with how you maximize your own welfare, not the way I think you should maximize your own welfare. That's kind of the benefit of thinking about social welfare economics over the way it's kind of peddled to us in the media and via politicians. And it's one of the reasons why I kind of gripe a lot about these things. Should label our graphs here to be complete since I'm being recorded. Okay, last quick little thing here. What does all this mean? This. What if this happens with our community indifference curve? What if we go from community indifference curve 1 out to community indifference curve 2? What can I say about our level of social welfare? Who's better off? Well, as many people as possible, given the only way we can really do this. Granted, some people may not be very happy with that preference ordering that happens to be the average. I'm not happy with the Snuggies, but I only have one vote out of many, right? And so we're all kind of factored in, and we can say that social welfare is at a higher level. Some people may be better off, some people may be worse off, but there's going to be more people made better off, as many as possible, relative to the number of people that are possibly made worse off. Typically, any kind of public action where politicians decide these things, there's always winners and losers, and many times the winners are the squeaky wheel that got the oil, and the losers are the masses who are kind of tuned out. So it's one thing we kind of like about free markets. They always seem to kind of cater to everybody in a fair way. Granted, rich people get more votes than poor people in a free market economy, but they also get more votes in a democracy, by the way. They tend to vote more than poor people do. And they can do super PACs and do all kinds of donations and get more, they have more of a political voice. So it's to say that somehow a political system is more fair than a free market system because it doesn't cater to the rich might be misguided. Okay. Last thing before we call this lecture and take a quick break. The whole purpose of this was to show that more is not just better because I say so. More is really a reflection, the way we're measuring it, it's a reflection of our increase in social welfare as measured by the people whose welfare we're talking about specifically, not based on what I think. So before I just said, trust me, you're better off. Now I'm saying, trust yourself, you're better off. And how does this work? Well, remember our example, the last one we did, going from A to B and then out to C. Why is that? Well, look at what we're doing here. Why are we at A in the first place? I'm arguing we're at A because what have we done at point A? Remember, this right here, this curve is our production possibility curve. That's all the possible combinations that we can produce. But I mentioned something very important. It's not enough just to be on the production possibility curve. You've got to be at the right point. You don't want to waste all of your resources making stuff that nobody wants. So what is point A? Point A is the point of resource allocation that maximizes social welfare according to this community indifference curve. If at that point we can specialize to point B and trade out to point C, what does that allow us to do? Kind of missed it there. It allows us to get to a higher level of social welfare. So all of these examples we've done of going from A to B to C in the previous lectures, where we were just getting outside of our production possibility curve, notice what that actually means. It means we're getting to a higher level of social welfare, and that's cleaned up that second problem. Actually, this example cleans up both of those two problems. It shows us that we can have partial specialization with an increasing cost or a bowed outward production possibility curve, and it shows us that more is better in a meaningful way according to these community indifference curves. So now we've got all the tools to move on to modern trade theory. We'll pick that up in the next lecture.